I'm Michael Levine Clark. I'm the Dean of Libraries at the University of Denver. Um, I'm here with Megan Oakleaf, who's an associate dean and professor in the Syracuse Information School. Am I right that it's the Information School? School of Information. And Stephen Rintut, who's the founder and CEO of Coherent Digital. So I'm going to start off by talking about rankings and reputation, and sort of thinking through how the library fits into that role. So I went to, I asked ChatGPT to tell me what the top 10 most commonly cited strategic priorities are on university web pages. These all look right. I'm sure that most of you who work for an institution would recognize at least some of these as priorities for your institution. They're common things that the university says very publicly that matters. And I'm not going to touch on any of these at the moment. I'm thinking, I just wanted to sort of put them out there as things that are commonly important in institutions. I'm interested particularly in trying to think through the things that my boss, the provost, and my boss's boss, the chancellor, care about. And while the priorities on the previous slide were sort of high level, publicly facing things, these are more internal priorities, and these are priorities that I have heard over and over again from my two bosses, essentially, that matter for the institution. The chancellor's cabinet is the chancellor and the vice chancellors. They have 3 subcommittees this year, one focused on enrollment, one on reputation, one on culture and engagement. And the provost, who's brand new, just about 3 months into her tenure, has 3 goals for the year that she talks about in every single meeting I'm with her in. She touches on all these. One about enrollment and retention, one about career outcomes, and one about academic excellence. And what I think is really interesting is that 3 of these are essentially about, they're about the financial success of the institution, but they're about reputation and about rankings in many ways, right? They are about getting students to come and getting students to stay at the institution. And so I've been focusing a lot of my thought on how the library can help with those things. I think it's worth asking what the library role should be, right? Are these initiatives that make sense for the library to participate in? Is it work that we can do sort of by expanding our existing work, using people and services we have in place, or do we actually need to disrupt some of those existing services to focus on these broader university priorities? So rankings is one that comes up all the time, right? That reputation goal of the chancellors is very much about our rankings. And I'm going to just quickly show you some of the criteria that go into the rankings for 3 of the major ranking services. So US News, it's worth noting that 20% of that calculation is based on peer assessment. So university presidents and vice presidents are asked questions about different institutions. And so that where you fall in somebody's sort of internal ranking matters a lot for your ranking as an institution. Research isn't actually that important in the rankings for the U.S. News and World Report, right? It comes to what, 4% of the overall ranking. So pretty small. And these columns it doesn't matter which column you look at, right? They're roughly the same meaning, but just to sort of highlight that research actually isn't that important a criterion for US News. The Times Higher Education, 15% is teaching reputation, 18% is research reputation. So 33% of the rank of the Times Higher Education international ranking is about reputation, and 29% is about research environment, and 30% of it's about research quality, right? So this one is very much focused on research, and there's a clear role for the library in trying to help with that ranking. The QS ranking, 30% is academic reputation, 15% is employer reputation. So again, reputation matters a lot in all of these ranking categories. And then research and discovery is half of the entire ranking for the QS. So I've been trying to think a lot about how the library can fit into that work. We have a tool called Faculty Success. It used to be called Digital Measures. Every one of us has some kind of tool like this at our institution where faculty are required to report on their service, on their publications, on their activities for the year. Faculty, nobody will be surprised to know that faculty don't really like doing this. They make mistakes. They put an article in when they submit it and never come back to update it, and so on, right? So there's a lot of missing publications in this tool, and there's a lot of sloppy metadata. This is used both for internal reporting, but also for creating the profiles about our faculty that go out on the website, which is important for multiple reasons, but reputation is very much one of those reasons. By sort of using this tool, we can also help the university maximize the number of people from the University of Denver who show up correctly with a correct institutional affiliation in Scopus and Web of Science, which then ultimately feeds those rankings. So I made the case that the library could and should be part of this work. We have expertise in metadata, and that faculty reporting tool is all about metadata. We have expertise in the discovery and management of bibliographic information, and that's fundamentally what this faculty reporting tool is. And we can save the time of faculty if we take on this work. So I reached out to the Office of Research. I talked to the institutional research, sort of internal research. I talked to the Division of University Relations, right, our marketing and communications department. And clearly faculty care about this particular issue as well, right, the research information management. So I was able to get, by making the case that the library could help with these priorities about rankings and reputation, I was able to get a full-time position, a full-time staff position whose job it is to manage the metadata about faculty publications. We signed on with Esploro from Ex Libris. We've since canceled it, and this has nothing to do with Esploro being good or bad. It's about internal priorities about how we were going to use tools that changed when the vice chancellor for marketing and communication was replaced by somebody new, right? So, but we got enough support that we were actually given funding for Esploro. We were given funding for Experts Gallery Suite which is a bpress resource. It has since been replaced with Pure, but this is a tool that is helpful for sort of finding the publications and metadata of our faculty. We also had a 2-year subscription to Scopus that was all about this initiative as well. So the university invested money in the library because I said I could help with this work. The vice provost for research ultimately became a really strong advocate for the library to be a key stakeholder in this sort of work. And the faculty love this. We've never gotten such positive feedback on anything as like the fact that we're taking away this chore that they really didn't want to do. And we're making it easier for them to sort of manage the faculty profiles on a level that makes sense for them. It's not necessarily an area that the library would think to focus on, right? It's not necessarily the case that we're about the rankings and reputation, but in this particular instance, I was able to turn it into some pretty good funding for the institution. And now I'm going to turn it over to Megan.
Good morning. It's still morning. So my name is Megan Oakleaf, and I am a strange person to be in this room, as I'm neither a librarian nor do I work for a vendor. So my background is in librarianship, but for the last 20 years I've taught in the Library and Information Science program at the School of Information Studies at Syracuse University, and have had various leadership roles, and now currently I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs for the college. So that means a little bit of a departure from just LIS. We've got undergraduate programs, master's programs, and only 5 of our 40-something faculty are LIS. So it's a different different place for me, and it's given me a different view of how the university works with regard to their priorities and the way they communicate about them and the way that silos work in our institution. So I'm going to talk sort of from that perspective. So in this role now, I work more closely with the provost's office. We work on accreditation. We work on academic program review, which is that's a euphemistic term, retention, academic integrity, AI, new majors, all of those things. And our meetings are both academic affairs and faculty affairs. So the short version of this is that everything that's coming that's going to affect students or faculty comes through us. We're the dean's second, and the communication path comes through us. And so that's why I think what I'm seeing is really interesting and relevant to you all. One of the things I don't see on a regular basis is the library in the room with me. And that really bothers me as someone who is entrenched in librarianship. I teach library science classes, I've been a librarian and so on. And that's not due to really a lack of value around the library. The library is very respected on our campus, very much so. We have great leadership, we have great librarians. So it's not any fault of the libraries. And I'm not sure entirely it's the fault of the people holding the meetings either. They simply do not think of the library when they think of units primarily focused on teaching, learning, and research. I have pointed this out several times, and there was this great activity on silos that I got to take advantage of as well. Anyway, so that is concerning to me, and I think we can do better and do more. So kind of to locate my time within Michael's, he was talking about how rankings measure important goals and that we can align with those. I'm going to focus on institutional priorities, which I'm defining a little broader than just the rankings metrics, but also things that are important to a campus and the strategic plan and whatnot, and how when we align with the goals, we can improve the institution, not just playing the metrics game, which is an important game to play, but really improving quality in the institution. And I have to say, as a faculty member who hates the faculty portfolio system, that is a huge value add, what you just described, and I'm going to levy my institution to do the same. So some of the metrics that are measured in rankings do, in effect, really go to quality. We like to say how the metrics are not great and they aren't great. Anytime you try to measure something across many different types of institutions, you lose granularity. But they are about whether or not students are successful, and they are about whether or not faculty are successful, and they are about other things like peer assessments. I get those surveys. They're less than 10 questions long, and they ask questions like, which institution do you think is best in this area? And you pick from a list. So you should always pick your own first. And then they'll ask second and third. I mean, it's that basic. The polling for homecoming queen is more complicated. They're really, really simplistic. And part of that is that they only go to people who are older, more senior roles in the profession. And so those people also have legacy thoughts, not necessarily about what's happening now, but what's been happening as well. So anyway, there's some issues with that. So as we all know in this room, libraries impact many of those things that those metrics measure, right? Student success and access, faculty productivity, funding, recruitment of faculty, recruitment of students, all of those things. There's a tiny URL on this slide where I lined up some impact that the library has on things that institutions care about. The URL is on the next couple slides, and you might find it interesting. I'll talk through some of it, but not all of it. Okay, so those are all things that the libraries impact. The library also obviously impacts many things that aren't rankings, but are institutional strategic priorities. And some of these are mixed. They show up in the rankings or they don't. But where I run into concerns and like a plea for collaboration around improvement is when some of these topics come up and the library is not in the room at that time. They might be in a room later on, but the primary channel of communication, they're not in the room. So for example, with affordability, we have a new bookstore. They have a new system for us to put in all our readings. It's required by law that the readings be in before students register. And so there's a push to do that. There is no place in that system to indicate that you're using library resources. None. You can buy a book. You can say you have no books or readings. So for me, all of the readings in my classes come from ebooks and journal articles that I link through into the library, not squirrel away in Blackboard or Canvas like most of my colleagues do. So I try to link them in. There's no way for me to register that. In the room, I said, has anyone talked to the libraries? And I think that conversation is ongoing, but no one else brought it up. No one else mentioned it. And that's of concern when we're providing all these resources that are supposed to be supporting student learning. That's an example. We also impact things that are maybe more institutionally specific. So the push for all people to do all AI all the time, majors, minors, concentrations, all of those things, affordability, a range of different things, DEI, sustainability, and so on. A couple examples here. If you were in this room, the last presentation, it was all about accessibility and the new requirements to make resources accessible. We are at a private institution. Our deadline is next April, like the April 27. But we only just had a presentation about how it was important for course materials in the course management system to be accessible. And again, in the conversation, no one mentioned that library resources, if you directly link, are currently in many cases accessible and will, it's a priority, and it's an easy way to make sure that your squirreled away PDF is replaced with something that's going to get attention with this push. Another example, not just the things that are important, but how we work that's important. So goals around data-informed planning, strategic goal tracking. When I look into the databases on student success, where it's got the DFW courses, DEF or withdraw, it's got all the metrics around different student groups and how they're persisting over the years and all of those things, there is zero library data in that system. There's no indicator of anything regarding whether or not they're participating or using library resources. So that's completely absent from the conversation. And in fact, in a recent working group I am working on this year, where we were looking at retention across a group of courses, it was me who said, when we get to the stage where we're supposed to find out what strategies work, what pedagogical strategies work in STEM courses, I said, let's work with the libraries. The liaison librarians will be able to work with us to pull some initial things. The Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning is on that group, but not the libraries, right? And not in a please do our work for us way, but a please be part of the conversation way. So they're not there in that regard either. Again, not the fault of the librarian, just no one's putting point A and point B together. Not the fault probably of the people running the organization either. They're all acting in good faith, and yet the silos remain. So this is a screenshot that you can't possibly read of the link that I sent all of you to, which you also can't possibly read on a phone. You'd be doing like a lot of this. But it is there in case you want to access it later. I lined up rankings metrics and the institutional priorities I just talked about, and a first pass at the way I see the library contributing to those places. And I think that other people could do probably a better job or add to it, but if you wanted a starting place for a conversation, again, it's at the tiny URL. How am I doing on time? Not bad. Okay, so in terms of being able to turn this around and add the libraries to the impact and, we're making a difference for institutional priorities conversation, we really need three things. Data, so that often comes in the form of use counts, but use counts don't answer the so what question. A lot of people looked at a lot of things. Doesn't connect to the why. A story, so quotations, testimonials, survey responses that voice the so what. I was able to get this resource from the library, therefore I was able to finish my honors thesis. Even I was able to print at the library, therefore I could turn in my assignment. There's all kinds of stories that explain the difference. And then analytics, and I don't mean analytics as a nicer word for more counts. I mean analytics that actually attach what made a difference for who and what that difference was. So getting into the messiness of what difference it made that someone looked at something. That makes sense. And then, of course, the message is, once you have those things, pretty easy to construct, right? So your message is in a conversation around getting into the meeting or anything else. The library is a mission-critical partner in accomplishing this thing you want to accomplish, which is, target the things that are most important, right, that we share values around. We've impacted this number of users with this thing, right, there's the use count. The users tell us it made this difference to their success, their work, their grant funding, whatever it was. And that can come from user voices, or it can come from analytics that will tell part of the story without the burden of asking people to fill out a survey. And then finally, the ask. If we had more recess, I think we should all have more recess. If we have more resources, if we had more access, if we could get in this meeting, if we could collaborate better, we could make this impact for more folks. Right? That's the ask. That's what we need to build. And so, being in the room is really important. Getting in the room, having the counts is really important. But that last piece of what difference it makes is essential. And I think that's often what's missing from the conversation, what difference it made to the thing that person who's making the choice about whether I get in the room or whether I get the resources or whether I get whatever it is I'm asking for, care about. So I guess I'll just finish, because I'm a minute over my time, by saying, for the vendors in the room, what I would love to have is a continuation of what you already do, amplified, helping librarians tie what the resources you're providing to what their institutions care about. Not just that they're there, that they made a difference. So we need help not just with the data, but also with the story. And I've got a couple more slides in here of ideas that are probably ill-informed, but I'm going to turn it over to Stephen instead of sharing those with you. You can get the URL to the presentation if you like.
Thank you, Megan. Could I have a show of hands of who here is a publisher or a vendor? And who here is a librarian? Great. And is there anybody here from the University of Virginia? All right, you're going to feature today. So I wanted to start with this image, which is of the University of Virginia, and look at the library. Is that a statement or what? Everything else is subordinate to the library. This is the center of the campus. So I started to ask myself, how did we get from there to where we are today? And why isn't there more spending on libraries? So it's not that there isn't more research happening. There's a ton more research happening, more than doubled in the past 20 years. And it's actually not that there's been a decline in higher ed expenditure. We're not talking this year, but in historical terms. But the library expenditure's been flat. And that worried me. So I started to ask, what actually is the purpose of the university? And that sounds like a very basic question, but in surveying, almost everything came up the same. And Michael mentioned this. It really ends up in some way to conduct research, and as Megan pointed out, to conduct education, in some way to improve society. So that seems like a really esteemed mission. But why aren't libraries getting more money? Well, it struck me that perhaps we've misdefined what the business of libraries, and for that matter, publishers, actually is. In the same way that these classic cases on the left have been problematic. If you define your success as buying books or buying journals or accessing books or accessing journals, you're not really getting to the heart of the institution. And if I was a provost or if I was a president, and I've been lucky enough to talk with them, when we talk about the library, it's not perceived as being mission critical in the same way as that UVA slide was. So how do we actually tie what the library is up to more tightly with what the university actually needs and wants? So some of you may know that Franco was not a fan of libraries or research in Spain. And so from the period from when Franco got in the 30s to when he died in the late 70s, libraries had a really tough time. Dictator in charge who really didn't like librarianship, research, the academy. So the net result was when the 1980s rolled around, Spain was way behind in research and way behind in education. And they made a serious case as to why libraries should be the center. This is the square footage of libraries in Spain from 1988 to 2007. It quadrupled. They got a ton of investment. So what did they do? Well, they redefined their mission. They stopped calling themselves the library and started thinking of themselves as an information commons. And they started expanding into many ancillary services. So if we take a look at some of these services, some of them are very basic, and a lot of them we're doing currently. But the actual perspective underneath is substantially different. And yes, they built beautiful buildings, and yes, they created physical spaces, but they started to make the library the center of the university. Use of research services, as you can see here, went through the roof. Things like the library as a publisher, or adding tools and apparatus to make publishing better, as in adding DOIs or assisting on copyright, started to increase substantially. Results dissemination. And mind you, this is up to the 2007 range. So today, I think it's as bleak a time for libraries in terms of the general populace as it's been in my career. There are many, many difficult things that we're facing. Fake research, lack of trust, tight funding, new media, citizen science. So simultaneously, as we have less money, there's actually far more tasks. I just attended a session a moment ago on the cost of bots actually attacking open websites and just how expensive it was going to be to solve that problem. So we're faced with two really nasty things. And on AI, oh my goodness, the amount of bad content that's likely to generate is huge. But there is opportunity in this. At any time when things are like this, the conversation with faculty about keeping a resource becomes somewhat easier. Whereas item X was perceived as essential when times were good, now you can make a case that actually things have changed radically and we need to focus. So I'm here to suggest there's an opportunity for libraries, much in the same way there was in history for the Spanish libraries. And that's to expand the library's role. So if you take a look at this chart, on the left we have lots of different kinds of media, and in blue is where libraries are actually operating very well at the moment. We've got journals kind of sorted, and books are pretty sorted. The gray is the stuff that gets to be digital, but the orange is actually where there's an enormous amount of activity. Research shows that faculty are spending as much time in the orange as they are in the blue. And my suggestion to you is you're spending most of your budget and most of your time in the blue, and yet in the orange, there are all these things crying out for library services. This is being reflected in the literature. So these are articles from Scopus that cite in the orange, going outside, pulling materials from the real world into the academy, and it's going through the roof. And why is that the case? Because more and more people are realizing that research for research's sake isn't really what society needs. Yes, we need basic research, but we also need research that makes active differences in society. If you take a look at university output, the University of Delaware has over 80 different affiliated organizations. Any idea of how many of these are actually tracked by the library, preserved by the library, in any way affiliated with the library? Not many. That's an issue as the library tries to articulate its mission and present the funders that be its value to society. This isn't being tracked. This is just sitting there. And this is important, practical, day-to-day research that's really making a difference. We did an analysis using some of the data we have our hand to. Dr. Pato here is an expert on smoking and smoking cessation. We looked at how many times his work had been cited outside the academy. We're seeing hospitals make use of his work. We're seeing local authorities and cities make use of his work. We're seeing charities and associations and IGOs and think tanks all make use of his work. This research absolutely, imperatively needs to be funded. And who is going to track this research? Who is going to actually make this research useful? Who is actually going to make sure that it sits in the OPAC alongside all the other blue materials? Libraries. This is mission critical. Not only is it mission critical to satisfy Dr. Pato's work, but more broadly to make the case that the university is essential within society. And it gets even more complicated. Dr. Reed is a professor who happens to be an expert on carbon sequestration in bog peatlands. He's also a bibliometrician and impact expert and creator of the Research Impact Handbook. This is a map of how his research actually played out in real life. So he did research in peatlands, which affected the government. The larger the circle, the more traffic there is, and the larger the arrow, the more impact it has. So NGOs and government agencies made substantial use of his work, which affected government. Now imagine how it disappears to a funder. Perhaps it's no surprise that he was able to raise $6 million in funding. The library skills needed to do this are the only place on campus, I believe, that this work can be done. It's not just capturing academic papers. It's tracking their influence. It's seeing what impact they actually make in society, and then completing the circle so that the next round of research can actually operate again. At the moment, the circle is broken. We're spending all of our time in the red and much less time on how the research is actually being deployed. I don't have time in this presentation to go through in detail, but if you look at this chart, you will see the number of issues that only a library can solve. In this space, there's rampant disappearance of content. There's a total lack of scholarly apparatus like DOIs and ORCIDs, things that we've come to accept as vital in the university ecosystem, information ecosystem. There's a total absence of materials outside in the global south, which are even more prone to disappearance. So my ask and request here is, we believe that the library's role can be put back in the center by driving and tracking impact outside the library. Now, that's not to say that, of course, journals continue to be important and books continue to be important. This isn't an either-or, it's an and. For preservation and access, just look at the materials that are at risk. They used to be stable, but this material is actively disappearing. These are all instances of real-world content published by governments that's disappearing. So I'm going to finish up here with an example from Syracuse, who by actively engaging with the community was able to raise many, many millions of dollars for their university, for their library, for research, and for their community and the nation as a whole. So for me, if we can get to this and start thinking slightly differently, rather than just books and journals and downloads and the associated metrics, we can start shape those impacts and those rankings that Megan and Michael were talking about. Thank you very much. So I think we've got some time for questions.